Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. The story I'm talking about today is episode 62 of my ongoing series, Worth 1,000 Words, where I write a 1,000 word short story inspired by a piece of artwork. And we are right in the middle of Halloween month, October. And if you're new here, I decided I was going to write horror stories every week for this month. And this is the third story in that entry. And thankfully, there are 5 weeks in October, so I get to remain in the genre of horror a couple more weeks. And this one may be a little bit more gruesome than the other two. I'm not going to say it's a very gory piece or anything like that, but let's just say it has a different flavor. So to complement that flavor, I needed some music, and I listened to the Hereditary soundtrack by Colin Stetson, and it was a great accompaniment. So with that said, let's check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled The Sacrifice, and it's by Victor Hugo Harmatiuk, who is an artist at Behavior Interactive and Wizards of the Coast out of Curitiba, Brazil. So I'm a huge fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and when I saw this image scrolling down the page, it really reminded me of it. You have just this very crude, very simple color palette, a creepy man or woman standing there holding a headless chicken as it is bleeding everywhere onto the floor. But there's another detail that's quite interesting. That is these strange vein-like things coming out of the window, stretching across the walls, going up the ceiling. This is very similar to last week's exercise in terms of polish anyway, and I love the crude nature of it. I think if this were rendered in a lot of detail, it would lose a lot of the charm. Well, charm for me anyway. So I'm looking forward to this one, trying to figure out exactly where this story is going to go. So Victor, thank you so much for inspiring this story. Hopefully I do your work justice. All right, let's see what I came up with. Marlowe caught his breath on the petrified stump his daddy used to kill chickens on, staring at a chicken he needed to kill. The old fowl had to be the one, the last one. Sure of foot, the house had told him. Simple of mind, sour of song. Marla. Daddy's voice said her name clearly, through 6 feet of soil. With that brain and that limp, had to name her after you. The last of the flock. Marlowe wrung his blood-stained hands. Some flaked off, not much. But what did, he rolled between his fingers into an inch-long needle. He aimed it at Marla, who gobbled down a grub before squawking a success that made Marlowe's ears ring, like they did when Daddy'd smart him with the flat of his hand. Marlowe looked at the flat of his hands, striped in what he had done, all of the ones he'd done in, but the wrong ones. Daddy had been simple of mind and sour of song, but not sure of foot. Marlowe had been too anxious for him to fit the bill. Thought it might have been 2 birds with the 1 stone that was an axe. Oh well. He threw a stone that wasn't an axe at Marla, and she gracefully dodged it. Sure of foot, it had told him. Had to be the one. For he had nothing left. But by God, he couldn't catch her. Marlowe punched the soil, rusty with old blood. He thought of that blood, feeding those grubs that old chicken fed on, consuming its brothers, sisters, and children. A foul fowl. No wonder the house wanted her. What you do, Lo? Marlowe winced at the sound, ears still ringing. It was Billy, lip puffed with chew, drooling and grinning at him with brown teeth. Just what he needed. Fixin' to kill that chicken, Marlowe said. Oh, Marla? Billy's voice dropped a few octaves to match Daddy's. Was she pretty? She, Billy friend. One friend. Billy held up 2 fingers. She's the one, Marlowe said. The last one, and the one. Billy no see. He put both hands over his eyes. Marlowe looked at the boy. Suppose it's for the best. You gone now. Billy scratched his collarbone, then pointed at Lo. Billy still have more friend. Marlowe's bones ached as he stood. He thumped them hard to shut them up, then crouched low in the grass, stepping on the green patches to keep quiet. Marlowe was busy getting fatter, beak deep in the ground, her plume of tail feathers so wide he just couldn't miss. A few feet away, Marlowe went for it, diving with his arms out. Because if one missed, he'd have one more, but swiped air twice instead, face planting just where Marla had been a moment ago, tasting more than mud. Billy was there, laughing so hard he almost choked on his chew. Low eat poop, low eat poop. Marlowe spit out undigested seed and wiped his mouth. He tried and tried again, the chicken always evading him. It had circled back, now standing on the stump as if to mock him. Marla think lo funny, Billy said. Billy too. Marla's wings flapping, beak squawking, even worse than before, was a barrage that Marlowe couldn't take. His hands wouldn't stop it, so he tried to add his wailing on top, but all it did was make the bird squawk louder. Finally, he thrust his head into the mud, but down there, all he heard was Daddy. Named her after you. Consciousness fading, Marlowe thought he'd won. Daddy was silent, Marlowe was silent, and most importantly, the house was silent. Then he felt a pounding on his back and saw daylight. Billy's head floated with the clouds. Then Marlowe flew with them. Got her, Lo. Marlowe sat up, head spinning. He closed his eyes until the world settled. And sure enough, there was Billy, Marla held by her tail feathers, thrashing. Marlowe snatched the chicken from the boy before she started her sour song again, and he barreled to the stump, scooping up the axe that he'd sharpened to split stone, slammed her to that petrified wood, and brought that blade down, losing a thumb knuckle like a potato peel, but barely noticing because of the voice inside him that soughed across the yard from the black windows through the rotting teeth of porch rails, chilling his blood because blood is what it needed. A sacrifice is what it needed. You done it, Lo, Billy said. Billy helped. Rigid, ignoring the boy, Marla stomped back to the house with headless Marla spilling a trail the entire way. The house spoke to him, most in the kitchen, where its exposed veins spread from around the window above the sink, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. Marlowe waited for it to answer, waited for it to tell him he had appeased it, and it would let him rest, let him die. But all he heard was the drip of Marla on the hardwood. She was the one. Damn you, Marlowe hissed. But anger quickly devolved into grief, and Marlowe pounded the hardwood as he had pounded the soil outside, the house repeating its demands in time, bringing him a pain that would have killed him if the house would let him die. Sure of foot, simple of mind, sour of song. Then a terrible knife-sharp sound came from the window. Marlowe crawled across the floor to the counter where the knives were, where he would try to silence everything anyway. Through the smudged glass, Billy pranced in the yard, somersaulting, bounding over the old fence and scrambling up a tree with hands that had caught Marla, singing something sour. Sure of foot, Marlowe said. Sour of song. He didn't have to say the third. Marlowe regarded the infection that spread up the walls through him. Billy, Marlowe shouted from the porch. I got something else I need help with. This story posed a lot of challenges. This is another long one. It took me about an hour and 52 minutes, I believe, to complete. However, the first challenge I faced was where to start. So you have this very ominous, haunting image of this figure standing here holding a headless chicken. And I really always, the first thing I try to do is figure out, is this the beginning? Is somewhere in the middle, or is this the end? And that's a really crucial part because I think you can tell stories with different pacing. So you can skip around, time jump, so to speak, to get from one place to another, or you can do these very, very small, these micro beats, right? As if you're just slowing time down. I've done that before. I've done both. I've created stories where there is a longer span of time and some where it's literally just someone reflecting about a single thing. And honestly, I prefer ones that are shorter time. I like the moment, preferably to the more drawn out time jump stories. However, for getting words in, those are much easier, as well as dialogue. And so here you can see I'm using dialogue. So because you've heard the story, you know where I started, and I started outside the house. This is toward the end of the story, this image you see here. And so really I had to figure out, what is this man, I decided it was a man named Marlowe, sacrificing this chicken for? And so the house looks to be infected. At least that's my assumption based on what is behind him. And so I just envisioned that this house was haunting him. It's possessed. There's some kind of entity here, curse, or maybe it's all in his head. Who knows? Either way, he is driven to quiet the voice, and it is asking him, it is giving him three phrases as a riddle to figure out what he needs to do for this. And I think the first epiphany for me was the fact that this chicken was not the sacrifice. Right, this was a red herring, I guess you could say. And so I introduced another character who would be the sacrifice at one. And what I wanted to do is tell the story. I wanted to pepper in small hints. Right, I probably was a little bit too repetitive, I think, in some instances, about the sour of song, the sure of foot, and the simple of mind. But I wanted to make sure that was in there so it didn't just seemed like it came out of the blue at the end. And it's funny, I forgot. So I started off early talking about how he murdered his father because his father fit two of the three criteria. And he thought, well, I mean, 2 out of 3, right? I said something like, two birds with one stone or something along those lines. And then when I got toward the end, I had this entire dialogue exchange with this boy named Billy. When I got to the end, I said I was writing something like, well, 2 out of 3 is not bad or something like that. And so he'd try again. And then I scrolled to the top and saw, oh, hey, I already did that, so I can't do it. And so what I had to do is really go back through the entire story. And I think that's really what took a long time, is making sure the dialogue felt authentic. I still don't think it does for Billy. I wanted him to come off as, simple or dumb, I guess. And so I had to go back through this entire story and make sure that Billy seemed like he fit the bill. And I think that was a huge challenge, getting the dialogue right. I really don't think it's right at all. I think it's serviceable at the moment, but this is definitely one where I feel like there's a lot of ways I could go back and emphasize it. Particularly the line, when he says, "Billy, help." And so what I'd like to do is actually go back and make that a request of Billy. Like Billy offers his help. Right now, the way the story is Billy just, sees Marlowe struggling with the chicken, trying to get him, or her, I should say, but he can't. And then while Marlowe's essentially driven insane, drowning himself in mud, he comes to find that Billy did get the chicken. And that was sort of the first hint that, Billy was sure of foot. And then I hammered it in a little more. And again, maybe this was too ham-fisted. I don't know. Maybe it was just knocking it over the head too much. Because I really like subtlety in writing, not obvious clues, but that's what I did toward the end when Billy was somersaulting and just prancing around like a little kid, frolicking in the yard. And again, that was sort of a clue in to the fact that Billy would be the next sacrifice, and hopefully the right one. At least that's what Marlowe's going for. So some other things I did. A lot of times when I'm reading novels, there are these little details that really don't seem to matter, but they're just nice color. And so what I did is, I had Marlowe's father dead. Marlowe killed him. There's just that little bit about naming the chicken. So when I first started writing this, I didn't name the chicken at all. I just said the chicken, the bird, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, it just popped in my head that maybe he had some animosity toward his father, and the chicken is just out of his reach. Is like his father's last bit of thing that's going to frustrate Marlowe. And I just accomplished that with a few dialogue lines, saying that how, the dad named the chicken after him, but like the female version. And I think think in retrospect, when I listened back to the recording as I was reading the story, sometimes it may be difficult to hear the differences, and that's partially due to my enunciation, but also easier to read, most likely, hopefully. And I did notice too, there was another section where when I was actually writing a narration, I wrote low instead of Marlowe, but I didn't change it because, that stuff I do later. Little things like that, for consistency's sake, I feel like could have been improved upon. However, I do like the fact that there is that just little bit of extra detail in there, how Marlowe, this chicken, is named after Marlowe. I think if I went back, I could possibly just call him Low the whole time. And I don't know, maybe that'd be confusing as well. And then just have a line in there somewhere illustrates what his actual full name is. And that would have solved that problem to a degree. The Marla and then Low. But since Low's a word, who knows? Maybe that would have been confusing as well. I'll have to go back and check it out. So in the beginning, when I was talking about the artwork, I said that I'm a huge fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original from the 70s, not any of the remakes. I mean, they're fine, whatever, I guess, but they're nothing compared to the original. And all of its campiness, it has just this like authentic horror to it. And I have a feeling it had to do something with, I believe it was shot in 16 millimeter, but 16 millimeter film gives it that almost like documentary feel to it. It just elevated it to another level. It made everything just feel so much more horrific. And that's the immediate feeling I got when I saw this image. I don't really feel like I captured it because there's one thing about that film that really always sticks with me. It's just the strangeness of everything. Like the bones here and there that's hanging around from the ceiling or just scattered on the floor. The grandfather who's basically almost dead. And just this strange family living in this house out in the middle of nowhere. And this character I'm seeing here holding this headless chicken, it reminded me of it. The color palette as well of the piece. So that's really what I set out to do. I don't feel like I really captured the weirdness there. I could have been a little bit more subtle, probably less dialogue, most likely. Kept it more internal to Marlowe's character, less about an exchange. Maybe he just was observing Billy at one point. The one thing I love about dialogue is it's so easy to show character that way because it's as if things are playing out before your eyes, right? You see these two characters having a conversation, and dialogue can be a very powerful thing. And again, that's why I think I struggled with Billy's dialogue in the rewrite because I wanted it to come off as him sounding simple. And so I was focusing on the actual words I used and omitting certain words. So when I read it, I realized that a lot of that can be done in the voice. Not that I'm a voice artist by any stretch, but I was discovering when I was reading it and trying to come up with a voice for Billy, that really comes through, I think, a lot. So I don't know that I would necessarily need to have to simplify the dialogue as much. It could also be things like body language. So another hint or clue that I put in there was that, when he said he had one friend and he held up two fingers. So maybe that's a little bit, again, ham-fisted. I don't know. It's little things like that allow you to clue the reader in, I think, without spelling it out. And it's challenging, of course. Like there's so many things I would improve with this, I think. But again, that's part of the rewrite. That's what that's for. But I also think that there's something to be said for just the way, whatever the story is, whatever it came out to be. Like I set out to create sort of an atmosphere of Texas Chainsaw Massacre or some kind of creepy story, in that universe. It became its own thing. I didn't really get the creepy feeling as I was reading it, so I think that's a failure on my part. But I don't think it's a terrible story. It's fine. I completed what I set out to do for the most part, and that being that the chicken you're seeing is definitely not the sacrifice. It's someone just out of sight through that window on the other side of the house. And so he gets that realization at the very end that that is the actual sacrifice. And I know when I tell a lot of these stories, I use Southern accents and kind of, old South vernacular. But if you are Southern, please do not take offense. It's just where I go when I do these things because, again, reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think another thing I could have improved was the connection to the house. I could have started it that way, actually. I do like the first line about him talking about he's resting on the stump that his dad used to kill chickens on while he's looking at a chicken he needed to kill. I like the repetition of that. I don't feel like I gave the house an ominous enough feeling to it or a connection. I do like the line right here that I'm writing where I talk about, it's out across the yard, through black windows, through rotting porch posts. Kind of like it's personifying the house, and I enjoy that, especially because if it is a presence, if it is consciousness or something along that lines, I feel like it just adds that extra layer of color to it. But you can see here I'm at an hour 14 already, and I'm not even at 1,000 words because I had to flip flop. I had to go back a lot, change some stuff, and really I should have powered through to the end and then gone back. But some of the stuff, sometimes that's more difficult because then you end up removing a lot of things or having to add a lot of things. And when you're playing with something like 1,000 word count, that can be a huge mess to clean up in the end. So sometimes it's a little better to keep it clean. And if you're like, okay, I really got to change a lot of stuff, it's probably quicker to go back. And I'm kind of experimenting with that right now in my novel, where I'm not really kind of blasting through it. I'm writing carefully. And then I'll stop after a few hundred words and then go back to the top and read through it and sort of just take another pass. Like I'm deeper into the character. I'm rewinding, going back. I'm making sure that I'm adding things that need to be there and what I have discovered about the character, right? So when you get to a certain point in your chapter or whatever you're writing, that you discover some things. And yeah, you could write like, oh, go back and do this and go back and do that. But sometimes I feel like when that inspiration strikes, it's okay to go back and do it. I know that sounds counterintuitive to what a lot of advice that you hear people say, but sometimes for me, like having, a 50,000 plus word mess is just so daunting to go back to. You're like, where do you start? And this way, it seems like you're just creeping along at like a glacial pace, but you do have some interesting discoveries. At least I've found that to be the case. Hopefully, I've lived with the story long enough in my head that it's not going to require major rewrites, meaning all of that polishing of the prose is not going to be not going to be a waste of time. And here, when he's talking about holding a knife to his neck, I fumbled a little bit in the writing there as well, because I sort of established that he can't die, or the house won't let him die, or something along those lines, and then I had to kind of fix it. I don't know that line. He crawled to the counter where the knives were, and he thought he'd try to silence it anyway, despite the fact that he knew it was going to happen. I said that in very, very shorthand. I was running out of words, and so that was the problem. But in reading it again, I can definitely see some parts I can omit. I feel like I do the sour of song and sure of foot probably way too many times for emphasis. I think that when you go back and you actually read the story or listen to the story, those are where you can pick out those things that it's called, like it's what I like to call self-conscious writing. It's when you're afraid the reader's not going to get something. And I've been guilty of going the opposite direction as well. I've been guilty of not telling enough or not showing enough, and then it is unclear to the reader because I've trusted in them so completely that they can read my mind. Apparently, it's a difficult balance for sure, and I would encourage you to err on the side of not saying too much than saying too much, because there's nothing that bothers me more than when every little thing is explained. I watched a film called Lamb today. I don't know if you've seen the trailer or not, but that really reminded me again of the power of not explaining everything. So it's about this couple who's lost a child, and you don't really know that at the beginning, and it's sort of implied but never said. And there's a lot of elements like that in the story that you realize they're not needed, because that's not really what the story is about. It sort of informs the characters or what they do in the story, but it's not what it's about. And it just again reinforced that idea for myself that don't over explain things. Let the reader sort of picture things and imagine things, and just hint at them. And I know that's definitely for a certain kind of audience. Clearly, Lamb is a very small, it's a foreign independent film, so it's not for the mainstream. The mainstream definitely wants most things explained to them, I feel like, unfortunately. Or at least, they don't really like to go too deeply into the head. Every now and again you get a nice, a beautiful film that has mass appeal, but I feel like more often than not, the really, really great gems are the ones that not many people see. So here I am going back and playing with Billy's dialogue, trying to make him, sound unintelligent, to hint to the reader that he is going to fulfill the prophecy. He's going to have the third attribute as being simple of mind. And so I knew I was running long. I see the clock ticking over there. I got about 10 more minutes to go, and I was like, I gotta wrap this up. And this was the downside, is when I got to the end, I decided, okay, Billy, I did not make him sound like I should have to convey the fact that he was going to be the sacrifice. And so here I am just rewriting at the very last minute, which means that I wasn't super happy with it, but I had to end it. I feel like when I start hitting close to 2 hours is when I'm running out of gas, or at least I don't want to make this thing go too long, because it's not about sitting there and perfecting anything. It's just trying to get this story out and complete it in about an hour. And honestly, I like the dialogue a lot better the first time around, when I didn't make Billy sound so dumb. And so I may go back and change it, and then add some more body language cues and things like that to indicate that, or maybe some, little bit of backstory here and there. Not exposition backstory, but enough to clue you in that he's not the smartest kid. And I ended it with dialogue, something I don't do that often. After reading it and listening to it, I'm okay with it. I think it's pretty well implied what's going on, and it kind of reminds me of starting stories or chapters with dialogue. And I know a lot of people do that. I've read in craft books that it's frowned upon. However, I don't know why. I mean, I've heard reasons, like, about how, okay, it's sort of a cheap way to be confusing and have the reader wonder who's saying what, but maybe I'll do it someday. I haven't done it yet. Welcome to the end, reviewer. I'm so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, maybe what I learned. And I think there was a lot to be learned in this one. If you did not listen to my writing analysis, I suggest you go back and check that out, because I'm not going to go through it in as much detail at the end here. But if you've made it this far, you do know that I was trying to capture something, or I should say I was inspired by my love of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original film from 1978, 77, somewhere around there. And that's exactly what this image conveyed to me. I don't believe I captured that entirely. There is some weirdness to it. However, it turned it out to be like somewhat of a haunted house. I also don't believe I created a very creepy or ominous tone, at least what I set out for, but that's a very subjective thing. You may have felt that way if you're sensitive to anything in the horrific. But for a seasoned veteran like me, I don't feel like I hit it. Also, toward the end, I made a mistake, as is usual, as you do when you're writing something on the spot, and that is the fact that I was making Billy this boy. He was the one to fulfill the prophecy. At least that's what Marlowe thought. But I didn't convey that enough. I was thinking that he fulfilled 2 of the 3 requirements. However, it turned out to be that I already I used that. I felt like Marlowe said that his father may have thought he fit 2 of those, and he thought maybe, oh, well, that's good enough. So I killed him anyway, and it didn't work. So I had to go back through the dialogue and completely change it. I had to gut it completely and hopefully convey Billy's mental state, or his mental capacity. And I did that with some other things with body language. So again, it's in there. Is it strong? I don't think so. I think it can be much more improved. And I think one thing that I would do is have Billy offer to help Marlowe early on, because that would be a great echo to the final line when Marlowe says, hey, come on in here. I got something else you can help me out with. And also the house itself, the thing that was compelling Marlowe or forcing Marlowe to do these brutal sacrifices. I don't know that I created a powerful enough link or a hint in the writing to the reader. I could have started it off. I should have started it off that way, right? Because you want to set the stage immediately. And while I do love the image, and I love the repetition and the prose of Marlowe sitting on a petrified log that his dad would kill chickens on while he's waiting there trying to kill a chicken. I love that idea. I love the way it sounds. But maybe on the rewrite, I switch it up, or at the very least add that in very early, maybe the very next line, because it's always important to immediately set the tone of something. I generally try to start anything with a character, though, because I want the reader to know who they're dealing with, whose head they're going to be in, rather than painting some kind of expository picture about a setting or something like that, because I feel like that just detaches you from the character. And my philosophy is always stick with character all the time, or as much as you can. So things I liked. I know I talked about a lot of things I would fix. I like the idea of the story, how it seems to be that the chicken, because the chicken is in the image, that's what you see. You see this sacrifice of this chicken. You think, okay, that's going to be it. But when I was looking at it, as much as I love the image, that's not powerful enough for me, right? A sacrifice of a chicken. I mean, people kill chickens all the time. Needed to be something bigger, something more grand. And so I like the fact that I use the aspect in the image to be a revelation, right? He goes there, he thinks he solved the problem, but no, it's actually this boy that he's been talking to, this nuisance in a way, who may be the one to solve all of his problems. And I'm glad I didn't show it. It's implied at the very end of that last line of dialogue. So I do like that. But anyway, this one's going to be one that's going to take a little bit more work than usual, but that's okay. You know, I think that I actually enjoy going back and editing things and really polishing them up and discovering things that the only time you can really discover once you've gotten to the end of something. I hope you liked it. I hope it added to your Halloween reading or listening. And if you'd like to support the channel, give me a like if you like the video, subscribe for story-related content, check out my long-form novels in the description below. Keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.